Okay, let's just jump right in. What if I told you the entire global financial system, the one America built and backed for nearly a century, wasn't just collapsing on its own? What if it was being torn down on purpose by the U.S. itself? That's the wild, provocative idea we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, you heard that right. This isn't just some fringe theory. It comes from financial strategist Park Sek-jung, who basically said the U.S. can no longer sustain the system it built. Now it is trying to destroy it. I mean, wow, that suggests we are on the brink of a massive, planned reset of the global order, with the U.S. deciding to change all the rules for everyone.
So to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. We'll look at the historical decline of empires, America's crazy debt problem, a shocking plan to get out of it, the whole U.S.-China rivalry, and then what it all means for the rest of us.
All right, first things first. To even begin to understand why a superpower would tear down its own house, you have to look at this pattern, a cycle that's played out over and over again throughout history.
You might have heard of this idea, the hegemonic cycle. Guys like Ray Dalio have talked a lot about it. It's not really about politics. It's more like a law of nature for empires. They rise, they peak, and then they inevitably decline. And all the signs are pointing to one thing. The United States has officially entered that final phase.
So what does it even take to become a global hegemon? Well, historically, it's a 3-step recipe. First, you need a powerful military. Check. Second, you've got to be the king of manufacturing and technology. And third, you build a global system, like the dollar, that everyone has to play by. After World War II, America had all 3 on lock.
But here's where the trouble started. Back in the 2000s, with costs rising at home, the U.S. made a decision that seemed smart at the time. It shipped its manufacturing jobs overseas, mostly to China. Sure, it created some nice short-term profits, but what it really did was plant the seeds for a huge, long-term weakness that has now exploded into a full-blown crisis.
And that one move, the decision to stop being the world's factory floor, is what set the trap. A debt trap that America, right now, just can't get out of using the old playbook.
Think about it. If you're not making stuff anymore, how do you keep the economy humming? Simple. You borrow. And that's exactly what happened. The U.S. economy shifted to being all about services and finance, and it was all paid for with massive trade deficits and a national debt that just started spiraling completely out of control.
Which brings us to a really scary tipping point. By 2025, and that is right around the corner, the U.S. government is on track to spend more money just on the interest for its debt than it does on its entire enormous military budget. Let that sink in.
You know, the historian Niall Ferguson put it perfectly. No empire in history has survived after paying more on debt interest than on defense. That's not just some hot take. That's a historical fact. Crossing that line has been the death knell for every great power that came before. It's a flashing red light telling us the current system is just broken.
So, okay, you're facing this impossible debt crisis. What do you do? Well, the plan isn't to start cutting back and saving money. Nope. The plan is to intentionally shock the entire global financial system, and it looks like it's a 2-act play.
We've all been watching Act 1 for a few years now. The trade war, all the tariffs, the fights over supply chains, that was just the appetizer. Act 2, well, that's the main event, and it's something called the debt war.
And this really is the trillion-dollar question, isn't it? How does a country solve a debt crisis without actually paying its debts? I mean, you can't pay, and you can't just default. So what's left? The answer isn't to suffer. It's to literally change the rules of money itself.
And it seems like there are 2 main plays here. The first one is the old-school move. Just crank up inflation and make all that old debt you owe worth a whole lot less. It's simple, but it hurts. But the second strategy, this one is brand new and kind of wild. It involves using the crypto world to create a whole new market for U.S. debt.
So check this out. Stablecoins, like Tether and USDC, have to be backed by something safe and stable to hold their value. And what's the safest asset on Earth? U.S. government bonds. Right now, these crypto companies are buying up so many U.S. bonds they already hold more than entire countries like South Korea. As crypto gets bigger, this creates this huge, new, almost hidden system for funding America's debt, a system that completely bypasses the traditional banks and foreign governments.
But of course, this whole internal crisis isn't happening in some kind of bubble. It's playing out right in the middle of the biggest global power showdown we've seen in a century.
You've probably heard of the Thucydides trap. It's this deadly pattern that happens when a rising power, in this case China, gets big enough to challenge the ruling power, the US. Historically, when this happens, conflict is almost inevitable. And with China's economy now more than 70% the size of America's, well, we are deep, deep in that danger zone.
You know, for decades, these two had a pretty sweet deal going. The US was the world's biggest consumer, buying everything, and China was the world's biggest producer, making everything. It worked, it fueled global trade. But that relationship is over. It's dead. Now we're in a totally new game where both sides are rivals. The US wants to make things again, and China wants its own people to buy things. The end result? Global trade is shrinking and supply chains are just shattering.
So, this global breakup, it creates a ton of chaos for everyone else. What on earth do you do if you're a country like South Korea, whose entire modern economy was built for that old system? How do you possibly survive when your two biggest customers decide to tear the whole thing down?
Yeah, for a country that lives and dies by trade, like South Korea, this isn't just some interesting thought experiment. It's a direct hit from an economic hurricane. It's a moment of incredible risk, for sure, but it also might be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to leapfrog the competition.
Okay, let's break it down. The risks are pretty clear, right? The old supply chains are toast, and now China is a direct competitor in all the high-tech stuff. But look at the flip side. The opportunity is massive. As the US scrambles to build new supply chains that don't involve China, Korea's powerhouse industries, we're talking semiconductors, EV batteries, cars, suddenly become absolutely essential. Korea could position itself as America's most critical partner, maybe even more important than Japan or Europe.
But here's the catch. This window of opportunity is not going to be open forever. In fact, it's closing fast. We're talking about a 2 to 3 year golden window. That's the time frame when these new alliances and supply chains are going to get locked in. So for Korean companies, it's an all-out sprint to claim their spot in this new economic bloc before the doors slam shut. So here's the bottom line. The global economic map we've all grown up with is being completely and violently redrawn. The very system America created is now being taken apart by America. This whole process is going to create some very clear winners and some very clear losers. And it's forcing every single nation, every company, and every investor to ask themselves a tough question. Are you going to be agile enough to win in this new world, or are you going to get left behind with the old one?